เอาเป็นว่าตอนนี้นะครับทุกท่านก็กำลังรอคอยอยู่สำหรับหัวข้อต่อไปซึ่งสปีกเกอร์ของเราก็พร้อมแล้วนะครับ so now ladies and gentlemen for the next title this is the Asia Entrepreneurial Imperative the ventures by the web unit they can tie of the lion so now please welcome Mr. Jonathan Osman founder and president Global Entrepreneurship Network or GEN so please welcome sir
Good afternoon. It's great to be back in Thailand. I want to first of all ask the question, how many of the audience speaks English? Hold up your hands. Okay, well we got about half of you in English, half of you in Thai. I hope that you've got your translators, and I'm sorry I don't speak Thai. Thank you for letting me speak in my own language in your country. Well, this is very exciting for us to be a part of this extraordinary gathering. The most exciting thing for us is that this kind of conversation is happening across the world. I'm part of something called the Global Entrepreneurship Network, which is really an indication that the world is alive with figuring out how to birth the new, how to figure out better ways of doing things, and how to create a new future. I wanted to talk to you today, though, a little bit about, first of all, what do we see as an organization working in entrepreneurship in 170 countries? And secondly, why is it and what are the steps that Thailand needs to take in order to be able to capitalize on this revolution? Well, first of all, I don't have to tell you, if you look around the world at things like the election in America, or the election in Europe, that we've got disruption in our politics. I also don't have to tell you that we've got disruption in our industries. You can look around yourself, you can see logos on the wall like Uber or Airbnb. I mean, these were the model leaders of explaining what it means to disrupt an industry. And this disruption is going to happen over the next 10 years to every single industry on the planet. What does that mean? It means there's a lot of uncertainty. So what we're really seeing is what we call the new normal. Everything's happening faster. There are more people around the world through technology that have access to more information. That makes for a very powerful but very different set of people who are able to vocalize their opinions. That means that we have a society which is disrupting. And it means, for many of us, a scary time. The reason it's frightening for many of us is because it's uncertain. We like certainty. But let me tell you, disruption is the new normal. But the exciting thing about those of us who are passionate about entrepreneurship, whether we're founders, entrepreneurs, those helping them, or people like your prime minister and ministers that are trying to create programs to make their path easier. The great thing about it is that uncertainty is the fuel of entrepreneurs. We leverage uncertainty. We make sense of uncertainty. Entrepreneurs love it when people change the rules, because all of a sudden something that they knew was not possible in the past is now possible in the future. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we've made a science of tackling uncertainty as innovators and entrepreneurs. We've made a science because we've learned out that the process of doing what all of these companies are doing is an iterative one. What that means is you have to repeatedly do experiment after experiment after experiment. And it doesn't matter whether you get good or bad results, you get results. You collect data, you feed it into that cycle of innovation, and eventually you either retire the idea, modify it, or you scale it. We have a science of that. It's no longer a field where you're constantly pioneering in a very, very uncertain environment, entrepreneurs bring a degree of certainty to it. Secondly, it's better now because we now have a team spirit. Every one of these companies, you heard from Jeff Hoffman earlier. Jeff is the co-founder of Priceline. He's not the founder. Almost every company has a founder and a co-founder. And all companies get created by teams. Teams that have a disruptive thinker and teams that have someone that has unique knowledge of the industry and can bring some sense of understanding to a disruptive idea to make it into an innovation. What we're also seeing that gives us reassurance in the uncertain world is an extraordinary exponential leap in terms of networks. Now, networks is really the primary currency of the entrepreneur. Whether I want to test my idea with my friends or my potential marketplace, whether I want to find an investor, whether I'm looking for talent, whether I'm looking for technology, it all comes from networks. The cool things is that networks are cheaper and easier to create. And it's not just because of social media, it's because we have hundreds and hundreds more events and activities and platforms and means by which we can create them, choose them, and nurture them. This last point is really important, and that is that now it's becoming affordable to fail. We can do more with less. You need less capital at the outset of starting an enterprise. And what that means is you can test ideas, they can fail, and you just move on to the other one. You recycle the team. You recycle the idea. It's no longer something that is dramatically expensive to do. The cost, the capital cost of starting a company has gone dramatically down. Well, there's many other things we're seeing. We're seeing the fear of failure through activities like this slowly dissipating. We're seeing the notion that traditional educational institutions being the learning places for entrepreneurs is dissipating. As networks have risen, entrepreneurs learn on demand. It's an on-demand, peer-to-peer network and resource platform. And finally, and most importantly, it doesn't matter now whether you're in Silicon Valley or whether you're in Bangkok. It really doesn't matter. The point is, it is much more of a level playing field. There's no reason why anybody, anywhere on the planet, can't start and scale a company. The last and most exciting trend that I see in the world, in all the countries that we operate, is the people. They're very different. I started my first company in the 1980s. It was cutthroat. I didn't want to share any information. We didn't know what the word open source meant. This was an environment where you kept it all to yourself. And by the way, you didn't care if the other guy failed. In fact, you were quite happy to compete and winner takes all. That isn't the way these guys work now. Most of these entrepreneurs don't get involved in this to make money. Some of them do, very, very few. Secondly, they really are happy when their colleagues succeed, when they're in shared workspaces or hubs or accelerators. Those are like villages. When one person succeeds, the whole village celebrates. They are more generous. They're globally connected. They are considerably less concerned what I might describe as being greedy. They're focused on doing something which is exponential. They're focused on the possible. They're focused on what if you could do this? They're curious. And it's that talent around the world. And it's not just the people that used to go to business school. It's every kind of creative field in our lives. Everybody has a role to play in that founder team of birthing the new and figuring out something, a better way of doing something. Well, what I wanted to talk to you about today is that today begins the future of Asia's decade. As we look where much of the great potential lies in the world, Asia has an extraordinary opportunity. It's the reason today where, with the Prime Minister, we launched something called Gen Asia, the major 25 nations of this part of the world coming together to pool their knowledge about ecosystems to pool their knowledge about which support programs work, and to pool their networks of investors and entrepreneurs. And the idea is we can do something that's bigger than the sum of the parts. It doesn't matter if you're as big as China, or it doesn't matter if you're small as Myanmar. The point is there is a considerable contribution for all of those countries to make to the innovative and entrepreneurial path. So what are the 4 things we need to do? Well, the first thing we'll do is I would speak to the entrepreneurs in the room. It's really, really simple. We need to have more experimenting. We need more people trying their hand at becoming an entrepreneur. We're not all going to become an entrepreneur, and we don't want to all become an entrepreneur. But I've yet to find a single employer anywhere in the world tell me that someone who tried their hand hanging out at a few startup programs or showing up at places like this is less employable than someone that didn't do it. So we need to have more of our children, more of our friends, more of our families trying their hand at figuring out another way of doing something. And recently I got to give a speech in Spain to a massive room full of people. And the common denominator of all of those people was that they're all unemployed. They were young people, they were unemployed. And every speaker before me came up and lamented on the poor performance of government in providing jobs, the lack of impact of the programs made to tackle unemployment. And I went up there and I put that big thing on the notice on the blackboard. I said, I'm sorry guys, but you've got no excuses. Because there's one thing you have when you're unemployed, and that's time. You have time. If you have time, you have a golden thing. I'm a parent of 3 young children. Takes my time. I've founded a global NGO. Takes my time. I've created 2 companies. Takes my time. But if I had extra time, there's many, many other things I could be doing. So, why? Well, I just mentioned it. First of all, it's much better than it was in previous years. Number 1, startup communities will celebrate with anybody who succeeds. They're there to help you. You have a massive support system. They're like villages. There's so many startup programs. The big problem with governments is to work out why aren't people using them. Number 2, as I mentioned earlier, you need much less capital. What used to cost $50,000 50 years ago only costs $5,000 today. Number 3, when I started my company, I had to raise money in order to hire a media firm if I was to get visibility. No longer the case. Social media has effectively made, if you have time, you're able to promote your product or service. And number 4, pedigree no longer matters. It doesn't matter what school you went to, what part of society you're a part of. None of these things matter anymore. Do you think it really matters? No. What really matters is whether or not you've got a great team, a great idea, and you've got an optimistic output. And hey, easier than it was before. When I started my company, you bet it mattered who your family was, or it mattered where you went to school. Also, entrepreneurs have no excuse anymore because you can create a company in any industry. I'm shouting against the other guys over here. You can create a company in any industry anywhere on the planet. It used to be that you had to be in Madison Avenue if you wanted to start an advertising company. That doesn't matter anymore. It's easy to be anywhere on the planet and to start a company in that industry. Also, we have a population that's constantly used to being given something new, a new app, a new iPhone, or more importantly, a new design to a new kind of coffee. So the question is, you've now got a marketplace which doesn't get so set in its ways. It's open to new ideas a lot more easily than it was in the past. And I already mentioned that networks are free, but the best thing of all is there is endless free online education. You can pull it from free. Years ago, MIT put every MIT course online for free. Ever since then, there is so much content, we're spoilt for choice. So my point is, if you have time and you're a person who wants to come together with your peers and figure out a better way of doing something, you really have no excuse not to try. It is most certainly step one. You need to have more people in your communities trying their hand at becoming an entrepreneur. All right. How do we do that? In our organization, Global Entrepreneurship Network, we run something called Global Entrepreneurship Week. And in every one of these steps, I'll tell you what we're doing to help, where we celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit in 170 countries. It's over 35,000 events. It attracts millions of people who come along. They kick the tires of these accelerators. They kick the tires of these entrepreneurial shared workspaces. They listen to entrepreneurs. They go to networking events, business plan competitions, and they say, I wonder whether at some point in my career, at some point, this might suit me. So I hope, it's always the middle week of November, I hope that you will participate in Global Entrepreneurship Week in Thailand, that you'll get involved, or if you're not from Thailand, you'll participate in your local country, because it's a powerful way for you to bring your neighbors and your friends and say, I wonder if there's some creative juices amongst us. Step two. You've heard a lot about this today, and I won't get into all the detail I presented to the government today, but your government is in an interesting situation. So first of all, they don't have any choice but to play ball with you. You know why? Because of the Ubers and Airbnbs going out there, disrupting every traditional industry, government has to redo all its regulations. And trust me, most of those are going to be complicated because they're semi-public entities. And so it's enormously complicated. The government has to figure out how to understand the entrepreneurial mindset, because they need to understand how they're going to work with entrepreneurs in dealing with the massive implications of what it does when you disrupt a traditional industry, and especially one that's heavy with government regulation. So, governments also have to get involved with you because they're enthusiastic. They love startups. Look, you had your prime minister here, you have your ministers. This is a fun, awesome place to be. It's full of like the future, it's full of opportunity, it sees the glass half full. It's a very exciting culture to be a part of. But the trouble for government is they don't know what to do. They're concerned. You know why? Number one, they don't know what to do because people like us who've been helping entrepreneurs have not got better and good enough data to show them which programs work and which programs don't work. And the other reason they don't know what to do is because they're not entrepreneurs. They need entrepreneurs to guide them as to what specifically are the barriers. How do you get zero barriers? And which are the things we need help with? Entrepreneurs might turn around and say, we don't need formal classrooms anymore. They might turn around and say, we don't want grants. They might turn around and say, what we want is easier movement of skilled workforces and talents. But who knows? All I know is that we've seen a flatlining rate of new firm formation. We haven't seen, I mean, this looks great, but the data shows that we're not seeing a steep curve in the number of new firms that start and scale. Yet, we're seeing an explosion of programs to help entrepreneurs. There are endless innovation and entrepreneurship events. There's endless new accelerators. There's programs. There's government jumping over themselves to be helpful. But you know what? There's a misfit because we're obviously not intervening in the right way to make it easier for entrepreneurs. So in the United States, we did some myth busting. You can read, but these are some of the things we discovered. So first of all, we discovered that all the net new jobs in the United States over the past 25 years came from firms less than 5 years old. Well, think about that. All the new jobs came from new firms. And yet, the United States government, as an example, is organized by the Small Business Administration and the big Department of Commerce. We're not organized by big and small firms. We got it wrong. So there's a myth out there that everything's around small business. That's not true. It's actually around new business. So when we went out and figured out the data, we discovered that actually the average age of a US-born tech entrepreneur is, guess, 39 years old. It's not a 22-year-old kid in a garage. Thirdly, Silicon Valley is a very unique place that cannot be replicated. No one has replicated Silicon Valley. The point of all this is to tell you that you have to do better research. So for our part, what we did is we pulled together the largest institutions that fund research in the world. The World Bank, the Kauffman Foundation, these kinds of institutions. And we said, you have to align your agendas, you have to study these interventions, and we have to do a much better job at telling people like your Prime Minister, sir, if you're trying to help your entrepreneurs, the data tells us these things work, these things don't work. These may look cool, no, but you need these. So this is the second major step that Thailand would have to do to be the entrepreneurial decade it wants, is to make sure that everything you do to help an entrepreneur is deeply embedded in an evidence-based understanding of what is actually going to help those entrepreneurs that are embarking on their path now. I won't go through each of these, but a couple of the things that we've been doing in this regard is mapping all your entrepreneurial ecosystems. We've been doing it in very different ways. We've been figuring out not only how to map them, but we've been working out, so the size of these circles reflects the number of outgoing connections of entrepreneurs at each company. So we've discovered in our research something that no government policy or no startup program is talked about, that perhaps the biggest indicator of success of a support ecosystem turns out to be connectivity. I'll give you one example here. If you look at our Global Startup Ecosystem Report in 2017, something that Thailand's currently not a part of, but we hope Bangkok will sign up for. This is something we discovered, that the success of the main entrepreneurial ecosystem cities in the world is directly correlated, without exception, to the thickness of their connectivity among each other. So clearly, the ones that had more connectivity with the likes of Silicon Valley and the other major startup communities, the thickness of that pipe of connectivity was more likely to be a successful ecosystem as measured by the number of startups that continue to scale after 5 years. Okay, piece of research, but it matters a lot. It matters an awful lot. If you're trying to work out how do we use all this energy and this enthusiasm and these resources wisely, we need this kind of data. So step one has to be better data, better data, better data. All right, this is the really fun world, which is the policy world. So right now, we're seeing, as I mentioned to you, digital disruption, and we're seeing a lot of ways that government now can play a major role in making it easier for people to start and scale. You're seeing right now policies essentially that these are the kinds of things that governments are beta testing and experiments. They're looking at how do we figure out how better immigrant founders and look for models that we can allow skill sets. I know in Thailand, you're looking at how do we develop a next generation startup visa. I know the United States has tried to do that, but has struggled with it. But I know that Canada is on their version 4.0 of their startup visa. I mean, in the United States, think about this. The majority of Fortune 500 companies were created by immigrant entrepreneurs. The United States has all these really cool Ivy League universities. And people from all over the world, usually the smartest people, come to these universities. And what do they want to do at the end of it? They say, hey, guess what? I'd like to stay here in your country, and I'd like to start a company, and I'd like to create some jobs, and I'd like to contribute to the national innovation. And what do they get told? If you start that company while you're on a student visa before you leave university, we'll put you in jail. And if you try to stay in the country after you leave university or grad school, or you got your PhD, and you want to start a super high-tech firm, you can't, because you know what? Your visa's over, you have to leave. This is the kind of dumb stuff. I mean, nations should be competing with each other for the talent. They should be like please come into our ecosystem. Help reinvent some of our industry verticals. Help us figure out how we do this better together. I still can't understand that, but that's an example of governments figuring out how do we do that? It's complicated. It's complicated. So a whole range of issues. I just pick another couple. I'll pick one out of this list, which is crowdfunding. In the United States, eventually we got rules that have allowed crowdfunding to exist. But it took 5 years of discussions to figure out how you write the rules. But these are all the kinds of things that policymakers are hacking. In fact, we at Gen now, not only do we have we call it the Startup Nations Ministerial, which is a ministerial, actually, Minister Pichet, from here in Thailand, is the ministerial representative for the whole of Asia to the Startup Nations Ministerial. I will tell you, and it's not because I'm standing here in Thailand, he's one of the most awesome, smartest, most capable, thoughtful, intelligent policymakers we know on the planet, and you should use him carefully because I know he's doing good things for Thailand, but we're taking advantage of the fact that he's got some great leadership for the rest of the world. But we have a team, one minister from each continent, and they're leading the charge on helping ministers to figure out all this entrepreneurship stuff, whether it be sharing knowledge about how to do some of this beta experimenting, or indeed in November, the next one is in Estonia. It's really cool. We actually do policy hacks. I mean, real policy hacks. I mean, there are teams of government guys that show up from country X and say, we're about to introduce this piece of legislation, or we're about to introduce this new regulation. We want to test it with our peers before we roll it out in our own country. Now that's smart thinking. That's the way an entrepreneur would think about it. They were like, let me go to people that also know about what it's like to actually introduce policy and deal with the public. And let me ask them whether we think this would actually work if we roll it out. Let's kick the tires on it. Let's tweak it with others. You know what we used to do in the old days as governments? We'd be scared. We'd say, oh, we don't want to tell them about what we're doing in our internal domestic matters. No, it's an open world now. There's 60 or 70 ministers out there around the world who think globally. They think, you know what? Value creation, new value, entrepreneurial ecosystems. How do I figure out to make sure that my country has the most smartest enabling environment for our homegrown entrepreneurs? Well, there's lots of program ideas. You know, China's working on a new fintech regulatory framework. India's focusing on its Startup India program. I love the India model. I mean, they gave up trying to figure out how do you come up with policies for a country of 1.3 billion people. So what they did is the Prime Minister Modi said, I'm going to go to all 30 states and I'm going to let you all do a startup act for the states, and it'll be a competition. And whoever has the smartest startup act will be the one that those will be the testing grounds of the ideas we implement nationally. Japan's looking at startups loan programs. Basically, Korea doing grand challenges. Malaysia, who I know you hear a lot from here, has a whole range of ideas that they've been implementing, but I picked out their tech entrepreneur program. Singapore's focused right now on their interactive digital media program. Taiwan is onto the entrepreneur visa that I talked about. And Vietnam is a really interesting place to follow. It's what I call rise of the rest, you know. You wouldn't think that it's got a mature ecosystem, but they're catching up real fast, and their government's experimenting in a whole bunch of different ideas to try to really fuel and nourish their entrepreneurial ecosystem. So what does the World Bank say that you guys should be doing? Well, what the World Bank said, you got to come up with a better enabling environment, be transparent about it. Number two, you got to focus on the missing middle, which is, we often talk about micro enterprises and we talk about the high growth guys, but what about the people in the middle, these medium-sized companies? Angel investment, vitally important to the emergence of your entrepreneurial ecosystem. Crowdfunding and angels is where it's all going. Look, if I want to start an electric car plant, California, and I need $100 million, sure, I'm going to go to Kleiner Perkins or to a big venture capital firm, and I'm going to look for the big money. but the majority of the experimenting going on in the start and scale world really just needs those small early stage investments. That's really the key to be able to drive it forward. So lots of other ideas. The one that always comes up, which is sort of typical of the World Bank, above all for this part of the world, is legal institutions. It's the number one reason that we find that investors will not come here, not come to certain countries, and that's because they feel like there's a lack of reliability and there's a lack of understanding as to what's happening in the legal system. So the last thing I'm going to talk about as I wrap up today is really around understanding this notion that what we're really doing is we have to create our last part, which is recommendation is around connecting. And connecting requires a healthy ecosystem. You hear this word a lot in the entrepreneurial community. But it's incredibly exciting because what it represents is the messiness of entrepreneurship, the organic, unpredictable, serendipitous interactivity of all the components within the ecosystem. Because what that occurs, that randomness, the discipline of intersection and cultures, what is happening is new value creation. And it's not planned. It's all bottom-up organic. And what we're seeing through all of the fun that goes with entrepreneurship is a new spirit towards this value creation. It's a renewed human calling. As I often like to say about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, it's no longer something of narrow commercial significance. It's something that represents the potential, the possibility of human endeavor. It represents the potential that we have as humans. And so I think what that's really done is allow these ecosystems to be things that really are selfless in the sense that we understand that we all succeed when we all succeed, this notion of all boats rise on an incoming tide. And secondly, that we understand that at the end of the day, is no recipe. There's no recipe, like I said with Silicon Valley. You're never going to find the recipe. It's going to be messy. You're going to experiment. You'll test these policies. You'll collect this data. You'll try this program and that program. But at the end of the day, it's got to be organic, and it's got to be driven by the individuals and the passion and the willingness to really try to do something beyond the way it's been done in the past. So we have got a variety of programs now across the world. We have 60 global business plan competitions. We have local startup community programs, all available through Gen Thailand, our affiliate here. If any of you are interested in being a part of this Gen network, we represent 10 million people trying to do exactly what I'm talking about today. And if you're interested in that, Steve Chia is our managing director here in Thailand. And I hope that you will find Steve and you'll get involved and you'll contribute, you'll learn, you'll take. We also have a pretty extraordinary array of competitions, but we also have a bunch of live events that you can participate in. The biggest of the events, I'll just skip to for you, is this one. Every April, we gather the ecosystem leaders from across the globe to one event. It's called the Global Entrepreneurship Congress. It's cool because it's free to attend, but it is 8,000 people all trying to do what we're talking about in their country. So if you're interested in being a catalyst in Thailand for trying to continue to see this movement grow, not just in terms of the enthusiasm of your prime minister, but in terms of the passion and the ingenuity of the local communities across your country, I hope that you'll come. The next one is in Istanbul. So we also launched today the Global Entrepreneurship Network Asia. So if you're just focused on Thailand, see Steve, but Steve can also connect you into our regional network. We're mostly global in the way we look at things, but we've understood that there's a lot of power of allowing nations to come together in one region who have a lot in common. And as I speak today, they are downstairs, sleeves rolled up, the representatives of 25 nations saying, what can we as Asia do that's bigger than the sum of our parts? what could we do together that would be bigger than what we're trying to do individually? And that's a different way to do it than the ASEAN or the APEC or some of the big, cross-Asia institutions, which are very much top-down. They're very much government-driven. This is how do these startup communities across Asia, how do they work together to figure out is there something they could do which is going to be bigger than what they could do as individual countries? And so that's what we're doing downstairs right now. We've got that at work. These are the countries that are part of Gen Asia. Well, that was what I wanted to cover with you this morning. I think there's 4 primary steps that I think Thailand needs to do. It's mostly around the world, and you need more entrepreneurs trying the experiment. You need better research informing better policies. And you need to make sure that you're leveraging the powerful global networks that are out there to ensure that whether it's because of markets or knowledge or whether it's because of simply thinking that you could do something that's bigger collectively than you can individually, leveraging those extraordinary opportunities to connect. And then also ensuring that you have the very best support programs, the programs that really make a difference and will have an impact. And as I mentioned before, when you talk to most of these entrepreneurs, the cool thing is, I don't like to use the word social entrepreneurship, but I rarely find an entrepreneur around the world who isn't socially motivated. They find, of course they want to do well, but they also want to do good. It's not worth doing it if you have to be successful at the expense of others. And I think that's possibly the most important reason if you're not involved in this movement to get involved. Because at the end of the day, it is about human endeavor and the possibility of doing something better than we've done it before. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jonathan Ortmans. Thank you so much. And you're still on the stage.